Picture this: the first light of dawn creeping over a sleepy medieval town. The air is crisp, tinged with wood smoke and the distant crow of a rooster. But while most of the world still slumbers, one figure is already stirring the innkeeper. We've all heard the romantic tales of bustling taverns, merry travelers, and flagons of ale. But what was life really like for these unsung heroes of the Middle Ages? Beyond the songs and stories lies a reality far more demanding, a daily grind that required wit, strength, and relentless hustle just to survive. This wasn't just about pouring drinks or renting rooms. It was about mastering a dozen trades at once, navigating danger, diplomacy, and desperation, all before most people had even broken their fast. In this video, we're pulling back the heavy curtain of time to step into the worn shoes of a medieval innkeeper. We'll walk through their day from pre-dawn to late night, uncovering the hidden challenges, the shrewd decisions, and the small acts of courage that turned a simple inn into a sanctuary, a business, and sometimes a battleground. You'll discover how these men and women were not just hosts, but healers, negotiators, protectors, and pioneers, cornerstones of their communities who shaped the very flow of medieval life. So come along with me as we step through that heavy oak door and into a world where every hour brought new trials. Every guest carried a story, and survival depended on a sharp eye and a steady hand. This is the true story of the medieval innkeeper, a journey into the heart of history, one demanding day at a time. While the rest of the household and every traveler in the rooms above still enjoys the last moments of deep sleep, the innkeeper's day begins in utter darkness. There is no gentle alarm, no snooze button, only the ingrained knowledge that an entire operation depends on these first solitary movements. The first and most critical task is the fire. This isn't a matter of flipping a switch. It's a physical ritual. The ashes from the previous night must be carefully cleared, new tinder and kindling arranged just so, and with a practiced hand, the spark is struck. Nurturing that first fragile flame into a robust, crackling fire in the great hearth is a battle against the morning chill, a battle that must be won. This fire is the literal and figurative heart of the entire inn. Without it, there is no hot food, no warmth to draw guests from their beds, no boiling water for cleaning or brewing. The entire enterprise would remain cold and lifeless. It's a quiet, meditative struggle, this act of creation from scratch, repeated every single morning without fail. Once the fire is confidently burning, another duty calls, the silent inspection. The innkeeper moves through the common room, a shadow in the dim light, running a hand along the heavy bar across the main door, ensuring it remains firmly in its brackets. He checks the shutters, testing their latches, a quick but vital ritual of security. The night held potential dangers, highwaymen looking for an easy mark, or simply desperate souls drawn by the promise of wealth within. This morning check is a sigh of relief, a confirmation that the fortress held. But the listening doesn't stop at the walls. Stepping to a side door, the innkeeper cracks it open just enough to hear the stableyard. The world outside is still mostly silent, but his ears are tuned to its rhythms. The soft snort of a horse, the shuffling of hooves on straw. These are good, expected sounds. It's the absence of sound or a sudden, sharp noise that would signal trouble. A missing animal, a broken fence, or an unwelcome visitor lurking among the carts. In these cold, quiet moments before the sun even thinks about rising, the innkeeper is already a master of elements, a guardian and a sentinel, setting the stage for everything that is to come. With the fire now confidently crackling and the security of the inn confirmed, The innkeeper's focus shifts from the hearth to the larder. This is the daily audit, a quiet and meticulous accounting that could make or break the entire day's business. In an age without refrigeration or last-minute delivery services, knowing exactly what you have and what you need is not just good practice. It's a matter of survival. The first and most critical stop is the beer and ale cellar. The innkeeper descends the narrow steps, a candle held aloft to pierce the cool, damp darkness, and listens. The gentle, ongoing fermentation of the barrels produces a soft, almost imperceptible hiss, a silent, happy song that means the brew is healthy and alive. He taps each cask in turn, gauging the level of liquid within by the sound and feel of the thump. A hollow echo means trouble. That barrel is running dangerously low and must be replaced soon from the store of maturing ale. Wine casks receive the same treatment, each one a small fortune carefully imported and vital for impressing wealthier patrons. Back in the main pantry, the counting continues under the dim light. The leftover loaves from yesterday's baking are inspected with a critical eye and a firm squeeze. Are they still acceptably soft, or have they turned rock hard and must be set aside for thickening tomorrow's pottage? Then comes the meat, preserved in salt or hanging smoked from the beams. He checks for any telltale signs of spoilage or the interest of pests. A careful finger is run over the great wheel of cheese, feeling for excessive dryness or mold that must be trimmed away. Finally, the root vegetables in their bins are assessed: onions, turnips, cabbages, their quantity and quality determining the menu for the day. This is a relentless high-wire act of inventory management. Running out of ale or bread during a busy evening means turning away customers and coin, a direct blow to the inn's reputation and purse. But over-ordering or over-preparing is just as dangerous. Food waste is money literally thrown to the pigs. Every spoiled joint of meat or moldy loaf represents a portion of the week's profits lost forever. The innkeeper must be a master calculator, predicting the ebb and flow of travelers based on the season, the weather, and even rumors of events in nearby towns. A feast day or a large party arriving unannounced could clean out his stores, while a sudden snowstorm that keeps the roads empty could leave him with a larder full of food destined to rot. This quiet morning ritual, this hushed negotiation with his own supplies, sets the budget for the entire day, dictating what can be sold, what must be purchased from the market later, and ultimately, whether this inn thrives or simply survives. With the larder accounted for and the day's culinary budget set, the true engine of the inn roars to life, the kitchen hearth. This is not some cozy nook for simple cooking. It is a roaring, demanding beast that must be fed, managed, and mastered from dawn until long after dusk. That single fire, so carefully nurtured hours ago, now becomes the focal point of a tremendous physical effort. The first monumental task is water. Every drop needed for cooking, brewing, and cleaning must be hauled by hand from the well in the courtyard, a relentless procession of heavy buckets that strains the back and shoulders. Only once a great iron cauldron is suspended over the flames, and filled to the brim can the real work begin. The centerpiece of the midday meal is almost always the pottage or stew, a vast, simmering repository for the inn's available ingredients. Into the boiling water goes a little of everything: chopped onions and turnips from the root cellar, a handful of barley or oats for thickening, and the carefully portioned bits of salted pork or bacon. This is not a recipe for subtlety, but for sustenance, a hearty, filling dish that can stretch to feed a dozen or 24, depending on the crowd. The skill lies in making it palatable day after day, relying on bundles of dried herbs from the summer garden sage, thyme, parsley, to add depth and mask the monotony. For wealthier guests or on special occasions, a joint of meat, a haunch of mutton or a side of pork might be secured on the heavy iron spit, but this is no set-it and forget-it operation. Turning that spit by hand for hours on end, ensuring the meat roasts evenly without charring, is a hot, tedious, and absolutely essential job, often delegated to a child or a young servant who must remain vigilant in the oppressive heat. This entire operation is a masterclass in resourcefulness and preservation. The medieval innkeeper's menu is dictated not by whim, but by the calendar and the contents of the storeroom. There is no popping out for fresh produce in January. Meals are built around what keeps: grains, dried peas, smoked and salted meats, hard cheeses, and root vegetables that can survive the winter in a cool, dark bin. A bushel of autumn apples might be slowly stewed into a tart puree to cut through the richness of the meat, and a precious pot of honey provides the only sweetness. Every single ingredient has a story and a season, and wasting any of it is unthinkable. The aroma that begins to waft from that hearth, the savory scent of stewing herbs and roasting fat, is the inn's most powerful advertisement, a signal to all within smelling distance that within these walls there is warmth, security, and a full belly to be had. But the aroma of cooking food and the warmth of the hearth are not enough to run an inn alone. They require an army of hands, and it falls to the innkeeper to be its general. As the household begins to stir, the low murmur of servants waking in the attic, the clatter of a stable boy's boots in the yard, the innkeeper calls for the morning briefing. This is not a casual chat, but a vital strategic meeting, a moment to deploy his limited resources with the precision of a military campaign. Everyone gathers in the common room, still chilly away from the fire's immediate reach. A cook, if he's fortunate enough to afford one, a serving girl or two, a young nephew learning the trade, and his own family members, all rubbing sleep from their eyes. The innkeeper stands, a list of tasks already mentally composed from his earlier audit, and begins the delegation that will dictate the pace of the entire day. Every pair of hands is assigned a role based on strength, skill, and sheer necessity. The strongest are sent to the endless, back-breaking work of water-hauling bucket after bucket from the well until every cauldron and barrel in the kitchen and scullery is full, a task that will need repeating multiple times before noon. Another is handed a large basket and sent to the market with a strict budget and a precise list, dictated by the morning's inventory check, to barter for any fresh goods that might be available, a few fish from the river, perhaps, or some early greens. The cook is given her domain over the hearth, with clear instructions on what to prepare from the available stores, while a younger child is given the monotonous but crucial job of turning the roasting spit, ensuring the meat doesn't burn. Meanwhile, the stables demand their own share of labor. The stable boy's day is a cycle of mucking out stalls, laying fresh straw, and ensuring the travelers' horses and any draft animals are fed, watered, and brushed. The inn's own cart horse, vital for market runs and fetching supplies, requires the same careful attention. This is dirty, physically demanding work, but in a world that runs on horsepower, a well-kept stable is a powerful advertisement for the quality of the inn itself. Back inside, the common room must be transformed from a shadowy space of resting shadows into a welcoming haven. Tables are scrubbed with sand and vinegar until the wood grain shows. Benches are pulled out and checked for stability, and the floor is swept clear of the previous night's rushes, often simply tossed out into the yard to be replaced later with a fresh layer. Every tankard and wooden trencher must be scoured clean. The innkeeper moves through this organized chaos, not as a distant overseer but as a working participant, correcting a poorly set table, helping to lift a heavy barrel, or demonstrating the most efficient way to scour a pot. His authority is earned through shared labor, his eye constantly scanning for details others might miss, a wobbly table that could spill a drink and anger a patron, a smudge on a glass that suggests a job done too quickly. This morning briefing is where the innkeeper proves his true mettle, transforming a list of chores into a symphony of coordinated effort, ensuring that when the first traveler stumbles through the door, the entire establishment is ready to perform. And now, as the fire blazes and the kitchen hums, a far less romantic but utterly essential duty demands attention. Forget any notion of modern sanitation. The morning cleanse is a battle against the inevitable grime of human habitation, a gritty, hands-on affair that tests the stomach as much as the spine. The first and most dreaded task is the collection of the chamber pots from each guest room. This isn't a simple matter of polite disposal. The innkeeper or a trusted servant must ascend the creaking stairs, a large bucket in hand, and quietly enter each chamber while the occupants are still abed or just beginning to stir. The contents of each pot are unceremoniously emptied into the central bucket, a process that fills the close air with an unmistakable and potent odor. This unpleasant cargo is then hurried down and out to the midden heap or garderobe pit at the far end of the yard, to be mixed with ash and lime in a constant, losing battle against disease and stench. Back inside, the floor of the common room presents its own challenge. The layer of rushes or straw scattered across the floorboards, intended to provide warmth and absorb spills, has now become a soggy, compacted tapestry of the previous night's revelry. Trampled in mud from countless boots, hardened crumbs of bread, splatters of dried ale, fish bones, and who knows what else are all trapped within this matted layer. Sweeping is a vigorous, dusty affair. The old rushes are gathered up with a wooden rake and hauled outside to be burned or composted, revealing the stained floorboards beneath. These are then scrubbed with sand and vinegar to cut through the greasy residue, a chore that leaves the arms aching and the air sharp with the tang of cleaning. Only after this is a fresh layer of clean, sweet-smelling hay or new rushes scattered, instantly transforming the atmosphere and signaling a new beginning. Finally, every window shutter in the common room and any vacant guest chambers is thrown wide open, regardless of the chill outside. This is the most crucial weapon in the arsenal against foul air. The medieval understanding of miasma, the belief that bad smells themselves carried disease, meant that airing out a room was considered vital for health. They may not have understood germs, but they knew that stagnant, foul air was unhealthy. The cross breeze, scented with wood smoke from the hearth and the cold morning air, would sweep through the building, chasing out the lingering odors of sweat, tallow candles, and stale food. This daily ritual of removal, replacement, and refreshment was a hard, smelly, and relentless cycle, but it was the absolute bedrock of keeping an inn habitable, a non-negotiable fight for basic hygiene in a world without our modern conveniences. The quiet industry of the inn's morning routine is suddenly broken by the sound of heavy footsteps and lowing cattle from the road outside. The first customers of the day are not the leisurely types. They are the early risers of the medieval economy, and their business is both vital and demanding. A drover, his face weathered by a life spent outdoors, pushes open the door, letting in a blast of cold air and the distinct, earthy smell of the herd he's guiding to the next market town. He's followed perhaps by a merchant, finely dressed but travel-worn, keen to get an early start on the road to secure the best trading spot at the next fair. These are the guests who arrive with the dawn, and the innkeeper's entire demeanor must shift from taskmaster to welcoming host in an instant. This initial greeting is a delicate dance, a negotiation that sets the tone for the entire transaction. The innkeeper offers the traditional welcome, a respectful nod, a murmured good morrow, but his eyes are already performing a rapid assessment. The quality of the traveler's cloak, the wear on his boots, the number of companions, and the value of the goods visible on his pack horse or cart, all are clues used to gauge his means and his needs. The discussion of payment is never crude, but it is direct. The innkeeper might mention the comfort of his freshly strawed beds, the quality of his ale just tapped from a new cask, or the hearty pottage already simmering on the hearth. He isn't just selling a bed, he is selling safety, warmth, and respite. The rates are rarely fixed. Everything is a matter for negotiation, influenced by the season, the length of the stay, the number of animals requiring stabling, and even the perceived wealth of the traveler. A wealthy merchant might be charged a premium for a private room and a bottle of his best wine, while a humble drover might barter a slightly lower rate in exchange for help with his animals or the promise that his fellow drovers will all stop here on their future trips. The innkeeper must be a shrewd psychologist, knowing just how far to push without driving a customer to a rival establishment down the road. A reputation for fair dealing is the most valuable currency an innkeeper possesses. One sour interaction, one accusation of price gouging, could travel along the trade routes faster than any horse, poisoning his name in neighboring towns and ensuring travelers take their business elsewhere. Conversely, a handshake deal that leaves a guest feeling respected and well-treated guarantees not only their return, but also their free advertising as they sing the inn's praises to every fellow traveler they meet on the road. This first impression, sealed with a shared cup of small ale to cement the bargain, turns a stranger into a patron and transforms the inn from a silent building into a living, breathing hub of commerce and community. While the common room bustles with the first arrivals, a different kind of commerce thrives just outside the back door. Step into the stable yard, and you step into the true economic engine of the entire inn, a world of its own defined by the sounds of snorting horses, the smell of leather and manure, and the constant, purposeful motion of the ostlers and stable boys. This isn't a quiet side operation. It is a central, vital, and incredibly lucrative part of the business. For every traveler who arrives on foot, a dozen more arrive on horseback or with a cart, and each animal represents a separate transaction, a separate stream of coin that flows directly into the innkeeper's strongbox. The process begins the moment a guest arrives. An ostler, the specialized stable hand, is there to take the reins, his expert eye instantly appraising the animal's condition, breed, and value. The negotiation is swift and practiced. There's a fee for the stall itself, a safe, roofed space protected from the elements. Then there's the separate charge for fodder, the quality and quantity of which are carefully bartered. A handful of oats for a weary palfrey, that's a modest price. A full feed of prime hay and grain for a merchant's valuable draft horse, that cost climbs considerably. The innkeeper, even while dealing with the human guest inside, keeps one ear tuned to this outdoor marketplace, trusting his ostler to drive a hard but fair bargain. A reputation for honest care of livestock is priceless. A merchant will gladly pay a premium knowing his beasts, the very foundation of his livelihood, are in skilled hands. Once the deal is struck, the real work begins. The yard becomes a symphony of organized chaos. Horses are led to their allotted stalls, their hooves clopping on the cobblestones. Water buckets are filled and hung, and the specific feed promised is measured out. The ostler moves with a quiet efficiency, running his hands over a leg to check for swelling, examining hooves for loose shoes or stones, and noting any cough or lethargy that might indicate illness. This is preventative medicine. A sick animal could spread disease to every other horse in the stable, a financial catastrophe. Meanwhile, the air fills with the sounds of contented munching, the rustle of straw, and the low, soothing murmurs of the stable hands at work. The smell is a potent mix of fresh hay, sweet grain, warm horseflesh, and the underlying, ever-present tang of dung, which must be constantly mucked out and hauled away to the midden to keep the area clean and the animals healthy. This constant cycle of arrival, assessment, care, and departure turns the stable yard into a relentless hub of activity, a place where the inn's financial health is measured not just in coin, but in the well-being of the four-legged patrons who are just as important as the two-legged ones. But amid the clatter of tankards and the murmur of deals being struck, one product flows more constantly than any other, the absolute lifeblood of the entire enterprise, ale. This isn't a luxury or a simple refreshment. In an age where water sources were often perilously unsafe, ale was the default drink for nearly everyone, from the lowliest laborer to the Lord himself. It was nourishment, it was hydration, and for the innkeeper, it was the steady, reliable river of coin that kept his business afloat. The small side room or cool cellar where the barrels were kept was the financial heart of the inn, and its management was a precise and daily science long before the first customer even thought of placing an order. The ritual begins with the tapping of a new cask. The innkeeper selects a barrel from his stores, one that has been maturing in the cool, dark quiet of the cellar. Using a sturdy wooden mallet and a carefully crafted tap made of wood or metal, he drives the spigot into the barrel's prepared bunghole. The first pour is never for a guest. It is always for the innkeeper's own critical assessment. He fills a tasting cup and holds it up to the light, judging its color and clarity. He brings it to his nose, inhaling deeply for the wholesome, slightly sweet scent of healthy fermentation. Any hint of a vinegar-like sharpness or a foul, off-putting odor means disaster. The ale has soured, and the entire expensive barrel is a total loss. But if it passes the smell test, he takes a measured sip, swishing it around his mouth. He's checking for the right balance of sweetness from the malt and bitterness from the hops, ensuring the flavor is robust and clean. This daily quality control is non-negotiable. Serving bad ale is a surefire way to earn a reputation for dishonesty and drive his clientele to a competitor. Most innkeepers, unless they operated a very large establishment with ample space and staff, did not brew their own ale. The brewing process was a massive, multi-day undertaking that required enormous copper kettles, vast quantities of grain, and a dedicated brewster, a role often filled by women. Instead, the innkeeper was a wholesaler. He would purchase ale in bulk from local professional brewers or from monastic breweries, which were renowned for their quality and scale. His profit margin came from the difference between the price of the entire barrel and the price of the individual pints drawn from it. This economic model meant volume was everything. The sheer quantity that had to be sold just to break even was staggering. A single thirsty traveler might easily consume 2 or 3 pints with a meal, and a group of merchants settling in for the evening could drain a small cask on their own. The innkeeper's entire operation, from the number of servants he could hire to the quality of the food he could serve, was ultimately funded by the relentless, never-ending flow of ale from those wooden barrels in the cellar. And then, almost without warning, the quiet industry of the morning erupts into the midday roar. The common room, so recently scrubbed and aired, becomes a swirling vortex of humanity, noise, and demand. This is the inn's peak hour, a relentless test of the innkeeper's preparation and poise. The door swings open with a near-constant rhythm, admitting a wave of hungry, thirsty patrons. They are a cross-section of medieval life itself, dusty travelers desperate for a hot meal after hours on the road, boisterous local craftsmen on their dinner break from a nearby workshop, a pair of merchants finalizing a deal over a shared trencher, and perhaps even a minor official or a cleric, expecting a higher standard of service and a quieter corner to themselves. The air, once fresh, quickly thickens with the combined scent of stewed herbs, roasted meat, spilled ale, and the honest sweat of a hard day's work. In the midst of this controlled bedlam, the innkeeper is no longer just a host. He is a conductor orchestrating a chaotic symphony. His head must be on a swivel, his ears tuned to a dozen conversations and requests at once. From his central position, he directs the flow. With a sharp glance, he signals a serving girl to clear a newly vacant table. With a quick gesture, he alerts the cook at the hearth that another portion of pottage is needed immediately. He moves through the throng with a practiced grace, balancing 3 overflowing tankards in each hand without spilling a drop, his eyes constantly scanning the room. He notes the merchant whose cup is empty and needs refilling, the group of drovers whose boisterous laughter is edging toward rowdiness, and the solitary traveler in the corner who seems to be taking a little too much interest in other people's purses. The kitchen itself is a pressure cooker. The cook, her face flushed from the hearth's intense heat, ladles steaming stew into wooden bowls as fast as her arms will allow. The young turnspit, arm aching from the endless rotation, calls out that the joint of mutton is ready for carving. Every serving that leaves the kitchen is a small victory, but the orders keep coming. The innkeeper must constantly balance the kitchen's output against the seemingly bottomless demand, making split-second decisions. Does he stretch the stew with a little more barley and water to serve the unexpected large party that just arrived? Or does he risk turning them away? It's a high-stakes calculation performed under immense pressure. Amidst the service, the other crucial task is collection. Payment is not a simple matter of a bill at the end. In a crowded room where a patron could easily slip away, the innkeeper or his servers must discreetly collect coin throughout the meal. A dropped penny here, a whispered settlement for a loaf of bread, and a bowl of pottage there. He keeps a mental tally for each table, a running account of ale consumed and food ordered, his mind a living ledger. Trust is given, but cautiously. A known local might be allowed to run a tab, but a stranger is expected to pay as they go. This constant, subtle exchange of coin for comfort is the heartbeat of the operation, the tangible reward for all the morning's grueling labor. The midday rush is a whirlwind that demands every ounce of the innkeeper's energy, diplomacy, and sheer physical endurance. A daily trial by fire that separates a thriving establishment from a failing one. As the clamor of the midday rush finally begins to subside, and the last of the wooden trenchers are cleared away, the innkeeper's work is far from over. He retreats to a small, sturdy table set in a quieter corner of the common room, or perhaps to a private booth, and from a locked drawer or a strongbox, he produces his tools of trade, a small, finely balanced scale, a touchstone, a set of metal weights, and a worn leather-bound ledger or a bundle of notched wooden sticks. The role of genial host now gives way to that of a meticulous accountant, for the financial health of the entire enterprise depends on the precision of this next hour. The coins collected throughout the frantic lunch service are not simply tossed into a box. Each one is a potential problem that must be identified and solved. The first and most immediate challenge is the bewildering variety of currency. There is no single, standardized coinage. A merchant from France might pay with silver écus, a trader from the German states with thick silver thalers, while a local farmer might offer a handful of battered and clipped silver pennies from the English mint. The innkeeper must be a numismatist, instantly recognizing the value and origin of dozens of different coins. But recognition is not enough. He must also verify. A coin's value lies in its weight and purity of metal, not the face stamped upon it. A common trick was clipping, where slivers of precious metal were shaved from the edges of coins, or sweating, shaking them in a bag to collect gold or silver dust. To combat this, the innkeeper uses his scale, carefully weighing each suspect coin against his official weights. For gold coins, he might use the touchstone, rubbing the coin against the black stone to leave a streak, then comparing its color to a set of known samples. A streak that was too pale indicated a base metal alloy beneath a thin gold coating. A counterfeit or badly degraded coin meant an immediate financial loss, and the innkeeper had to absorb it, refusing payment from that patron in the future. Beyond the immediate cash transactions lies a more complex web of finance, credit. In an economy where hard coin could be scarce, especially outside of major trade routes, the extension of credit was not just a courtesy. It was a necessity for doing business with the local community. A trusted village blacksmith might run a tab for his weekly ale, settling his debt on market day when he had coin from his own sales. A wealthy merchant known to frequent the route might be granted credit for a large meal and lodging for his entire party, with the understanding he would pay on his return trip. This system of trust required an infallible memory, but memory was not enough. The innkeeper kept the records. For smaller, local debts, he might use a tally stick, a length of wood into which notches of varying sizes were carved to represent different sums. The stick was then split lengthwise, with the innkeeper keeping one half the foil and the debtor the other the stock. When the debt was paid, the two halves were matched to prove the transaction. For larger or more complex accounts, he turned to his ledger, meticulously recording names, dates, and amounts in a careful, practiced hand. This ledger was more than a book. It was the legal and financial memory of the inn, a document that could be presented to a local magistrate if a debt was disputed. The innkeeper thus had to be a banker, a fraud detector, and a record keeper all at once, balancing the immediate need for income with the long-term cultivation of trustworthy relationships, his sharp eye ensuring that the lifeblood of coin continued to flow reliably into his enterprise. The brief lull after the midday rush offered no rest for the innkeeper, for it signaled the arrival of his most important visitors, the suppliers. The sustainability of his entire operation hinged on these daily negotiations, a delicate dance of diplomacy and hard-nosed business conducted just inside the doorway or out in the bustling courtyard. A cart would rumble to a halt, and the local butcher would heave a side of freshly slaughtered pork on the counter, or the brewer's apprentice would roll a new cask of ale from his dray cart. This was not a simple transaction. It was a high-stakes evaluation where every penny saved was profit earned, and every subpar ingredient threatened the inn's hard-won reputation. His primary weapon in these encounters was a deeply informed skepticism, born of years of experience. As the butcher proudly displayed his cuts, The innkeeper's eyes were not on the price but on the meat itself. He would lean in close, his senses on high alert. He'd press a thumb firmly into the flesh, checking for the firm resilience that indicated a fresh kill, not the soft, yielding give of meat that had sat too long. He'd bring it to his nose, inhaling for the clean, metallic scent of blood, wary of any sour or off-putting odor that hinted at the beginnings of spoilage. The color was just as important, a healthy, vibrant red, not the dull brown of oxidation. He knew every trick, a piece doused in vinegar to mask a foul smell, or a older joint placed strategically beneath a fresher one. He'd point out every flaw with the precision of a surgeon. A bruise on the muscle, a spot of discoloration, an excessive amount of fat where there should be lean meat. Each discovered defect was not a complaint, but a lever to lower the price. The same meticulous scrutiny was applied to every delivery. A farmer bringing a sack of grain would find the innkeeper plunging his hand deep into the middle of the bag, feeling for the telltale moisture or heat that could indicate mold or pests, letting the kernels run through his fingers to check for stones or debris. A brewer presenting a new batch would have to endure the innkeeper's tasting ritual all over again, this time with the added pressure of a potential lost sale. The haggling that followed was a ritualistic art form, a verbal chess match governed by unspoken rules. The supplier would start with a price far above market value. The innkeeper would counter with an insultingly low offer, and they would slowly, painstakingly march toward a mutually acceptable middle ground. This negotiation was about more than just the day's price. It was about the long-term relationship. Driving too hard, a bargain could earn him a reputation as a miser, and a disgruntled supplier might suddenly become out of stock the next time a rare shipment of good wine came in. Conversely, paying a fair price for exceptional quality ensured he got the first pick of the best goods and received preferential treatment during shortages. He might pay a little more for the baker's finest white bread, knowing it would impress his wealthier clients, while haggling fiercely over the coarse, dark loaves that would be used for trenchers and thickening stews. In these moments, the innkeeper was more than a shopkeeper. He was a procurement expert, a quality control inspector, and a diplomat, weaving a web of reliable alliances that were the true foundation upon which his bustling, noisy inn was built. Yet even as he masters the flow of commerce, the innkeeper must also command the flow of human emotion, for his tavern is a pressure cooker of tensions waiting to erupt. Beyond host and accountant, he is the lawkeeper, the unofficial sheriff of his own bustling domain. The combination of alcohol, close quarters, and travelers from different regions with competing interests is a recipe for conflict, and it falls to him to prevent a squabble from becoming a brawl. His authority is not granted by any royal decree, but is earned through a blend of raw respect, shrewd psychology, and the ever-present threat of the cudgel he keeps discreetly behind the bar. His eyes, which moments before were calculating weights and coin, now constantly scan the room, reading the body language of his patrons. He notes the escalating volume of a debate between two merchants, the aggressive posturing of a group of soldiers playing dice, the furtive glance of a loner edging too close to another guest's unattended pack. When a dispute does ignite, his intervention must be immediate and masterful. He never wades in shouting, that only escalates the situation. Instead, he moves with a deliberate calm, placing his own body between the aggrieved parties, a physical barrier to violence. His voice drops to a low, steady murmur, addressing the loudest patron by name if he knows it. Master John, you're passioned as you credit, but let's not spoil good drink with harsh words. Allow me to refresh your cup. This is the art of redirection. He doesn't take sides in the argument, he changes the subject, offering a free drink or a bowl of nuts as a peace offering, a small price to pay to avoid broken furniture and injured customers. He might gently but firmly guide the most belligerent party to a different table, far from the source of the conflict, using a hand on the shoulder that is both a gesture of camaraderie and an unshakable steer toward a new seat. Theft is another ever-present threat in the crowded, anonymous space of the common room. A missing purse or a stolen cloak could see his inn branded as a den of thieves, a reputation from which it might never recover. His vigilance is his best defense. He notes who enters and who leaves, and he keeps a particular eye on known local troublemakers. If a guest reports a theft, his investigation is swift and internal. He might quietly question his own staff first, then move among the remaining patrons, his tone not accusatory but concerned. A gentleman has mislaid his purse. A simple mistake, I'm sure. If any of you good folk have seen it, it would be a great Christian kindness to return it to the bar, no questions asked. This public announcement, couched in the language of a simple mistake, often shames a petty thief into anonymously returning the goods, saving face for everyone and avoiding a messy public accusation. But some situations are beyond his power to diffuse with words and free ale. For serious crimes, a violent assault, the brandishing of a blade, or the discovery of a wanted criminal in his midst, the delicate balance shifts. His role as peacekeeper is then superseded by his duty to the wider community and the law of the land. In these grave circumstances, he must send a swift runner for the local constable or the town watch. This is a last resort, an admission that the chaos has overflowed his capacity to contain it. Bringing in the authorities could be bad for business, creating a scene that frightens other patrons, but tolerating blatant criminality would be far worse. Through it all, the innkeeper walks a razor's edge, his authority a fragile construct built on perception. He must be firm enough to command respect yet genial enough to keep customers returning. A one-man justice system ensuring that his inn remains a haven of safety and order amidst the unpredictable tides of medieval life. As the final lunch patrons stumbled out into the afternoon sun and the great oak door swung shut, a different kind of quiet descended upon the inn. This was not the peaceful silence of the dawn, but a brief, precious lull, a pocket of time so rare it had to be seized with both hands. The common room, littered with the evidence of the midday frenzy, was not yet a priority. Before the evening wave arrived, the innkeeper's attention turned to the endless list of repairs and planning that kept his world from crumbling. He moved through the space with a critical eye, no longer seeing patrons but only the fraying edges of his enterprise. A bench leg, weakened by years of use and the weight of countless travelers, wobbled precariously. A shutter on an upper floor, battered by a recent storm, hung from a single hinge, creaking a mournful tune with each gust of wind. This was the time for the tools that were as vital as any cooking pot or ledger. The innkeeper would retrieve a wooden chest containing a simple but indispensable toolkit: a hammer, a handful of iron nails, a sharp knife, and coils of sturdy leather cord. With practiced efficiency, he would flip the faulty bench and set to work, the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of his hammer echoing in the empty room as he secured a new wooden brace to the leg. Upstairs, balancing on a stool, he would wrestle the heavy shutter back into place, driving new pegs into the weathered frame. There was no calling a carpenter for such things. The delay and the cost were unthinkable. The innkeeper was the carpenter, the roofer, and the handyman. A loose floorboard that could trip a guest and lead to a lawsuit, A leak in the roof that could ruin stored grain overnight. Each small fix was a preemptive strike against disaster, a defense of his fragile investment. In the stableyard, the same principle applied. The ostler might present a worn-out horse harness, its critical leather straps frayed and on the verge of snapping. Sitting on an upturned barrel in a patch of sunlight, the innkeeper would take out his awl and a length of waxed thread, patiently stitching new strength into the old leather. Every saved penny on a new harness was a penny earned, and the reliability of his equipment was non-negotiable. A broken harness could mean a delayed supply cart or an injured animal, and both were expenses he could not afford. Yet even as his hands were busy with repairs, his mind was leagues ahead, already navigating the evening to come. The brief respite was also a strategic planning session. The morning's inventory check and the surprising number of guests at midday forced a reassessment. Had the pottage pot been scraped clean? Was there enough of the good ale left to last through the night? Or would he need to tap into his precious reserve casks? He might send a swift messenger to the brewer to secure an extra barrel, or to the butcher if the roasted meat had been especially popular. He consulted his mental map of the surrounding roads. Was there a market fair tomorrow in the next town? That would mean an influx of departing travelers at dawn and returning ones at dusk, requiring extra bread and fodder. Had the weather held, or was a rainstorm brewing that would strand customers and demand more food and firewood than planned? In these quiet, contemplative moments, surrounded by the simple tools of his trade, the innkeeper was not just mending wood and leather. He was fortifying his entire operation, patching the cracks in his defenses, and drafting the blueprint for the next battle, all before the evening's first customer could even think about raising a tankard. But perhaps the most valuable currency circulating through the inn was not silver or gold, but information. Beyond the barrels of ale and the warm beds, the innkeeper presided over an unofficial exchange more vital to the community than any market: the trade in news. His establishment was the beating heart of the local information network, a hub where gossip, market intelligence, and even political secrets were gathered, sorted, and disseminated. In an age without newspapers, speedy messengers, or any form of instant communication, the inn was the internet of its day, and the innkeeper was its most powerful algorithm. Every traveler who crossed his threshold was a potential courier, their mind a living ledger of events from distant towns. A cloth merchant from Ghent carried not just fine silks, but also rumors of a trade dispute that could affect local wool prices. A pilgrim returning from Rome might speak of a new papal decree that would ripple through the local diocese. Even the humble carter, hauling goods from the coast, brought with him the vital, practical knowledge of which roads were safe from bandits, which bridges had been washed out by spring floods, and which local lords were levying new, punishing tolls. The innkeeper's genius lay in his ability to harvest this scattered intelligence. He moved among his patrons not as a clumsy interrogator, but as a master conversationalist, offering a sympathetic ear and a fresh tankard to loosen tongues. He knew that a man warmed by a good fire and a strong drink was far more likely to share what he knew. He would listen intently to the boisterous tales told at one table, then subtly steer the conversation at another to fill in the gaps, piecing together a coherent picture of the world beyond the village from a cacophony of fragmented reports. This role as an information broker came with immense, unspoken power. The local blacksmith, stopping by for his evening pint, would rely on the innkeeper's summary of the day's news to know if a nobleman's retinue was due to pass through, signaling a potential rush of business for horseshoes and repairs. The village baker needed to know if a large wedding party was expected, so he could fire up his ovens and bake extra loaves. A farmer, contemplating a trip to the regional market, would first consult the innkeeper to learn the going price for his grain or livestock in the next town over. Intelligence that could mean the difference between profit and loss. The innkeeper, in turn, carefully curated what he shared and with whom. He understood that information was a tool, and its careful distribution could build powerful alliances. Sharing a valuable tip with the local magistrate about suspicious strangers could earn his unofficial favor and protection. Withholding a piece of sensitive political gossip from the wrong ears could prevent a panic or a foolish action that might bring trouble to the entire community. His common room was a stage upon which the dramas of the wider world were constantly performed, and as the stage manager, the innkeeper held the script, deciding when to reveal a plot twist and when to keep a scene hidden in the wings. The brief afternoon lull shatters with the piercing call of the Angelus bell from the village church, its deep, resonant tones echoing across the fields and signaling the formal end of the workday. This is the innkeeper's final call to arms, the signal that a new, more diverse wave of humanity is about to descend upon his doorstep. The evening crowd is a world apart from the noontime merchants and drovers. Now come the pilgrims, their dusty robes marked with the scallop shell of St. James or the cross of the Jerusalem pilgrimage, seeking a safe haven and a simple meal after a long day's pious trek. They are joined by a fresh contingent of travelers who have pushed hard to end their day's journey at this specific inn, and perhaps most importantly by the locals, the blacksmith, the baker, the weaver, their day's labor done, arriving in search of companionship, news, and the simple comfort of a familiar drink among friends. Preparing for this nightly transformation requires its own specialized ritual. The first and most crucial change is the battle against the encroaching darkness. As the sun dips below the horizon, the innkeeper and his helpers move with purpose. Sturdy tallow candles, their smoky light flickering and sputtering, are set into wrought iron holders on each table. In iron sconces bolted to the walls, pitch-soaked torches are lit, their larger, more robust flames casting long, dancing shadows across the freshly swept floor and throwing the heavy oak beams of the ceiling into sharp relief. This is not about creating a bright, modern light, but about crafting an atmosphere, a warm, golden pool of illumination that promises warmth and community against the cold, black unknown of the night outside. It is a powerful beacon, a visual declaration that this is a place of safety and solace after dark, and it draws people in like moths. Simultaneously, the kitchen shifts its focus. The massive pot of midday pottage is replenished, but new, more enticing offerings are prepared to cater to the different expectations of the evening crowd. The remaining joints of roasted meat from lunch are carved and arranged on a large platter, ready to be served with hunks of bread and pots of mustard to travelers willing to pay a little extra for a more substantial meal. For the pilgrims and more frugal guests, a fresh, simpler pottage is started, perhaps with the addition of dried peas or beans for extra heartiness. The baking oven, still holding its heat from the noon bread, might be used to quickly heat pasties small, handheld pies filled with meat and vegetables, a convenient and popular food for those who want to eat while they talked or drank. The aroma that now fills the air is more complex, a deeper, richer scent designed to stir the appetite after a long day and encourage patrons to stay longer and spend more. Upstairs, the final preparations are made for the night's residence. The innkeeper's wife or a trusted servant moves through the guest chambers, performing one last check. They ensure the straw-filled mattresses on the rope beds are reasonably fresh and free of the worst lumps, and that the shared blankets, while coarse, are clean and sufficient against the night's chill. A fresh candle might be left on a small ledge for those who could afford the extra luxury of light in their room, and a simple chamber pot is placed discreetly in the corner. Each door is tested to ensure it latches properly, a small but critical detail for a guest's peace of mind. This careful attention to the sleeping quarters is a direct investment in the inn's reputation. A traveler who enjoyed a secure and comfortable night's sleep was far more likely to return on their next journey and recommend the inn to others. As the last torch is lit and the final pasty is pulled from the oven, the inn stands ready, transformed from a daytime way station into a nighttime sanctuary, its warm glow and promised comforts a magnet for all seeking refuge from the dark. The evening meal unfolds not as a frantic scramble for sustenance, but as a slower, more deliberate ritual of community and comfort. As the last of the daylight fades beyond the shuttered windows, the common room transforms into a scene of warm, flickering camaraderie. The fare served is often heartier and more varied than the midday pottage, a deliberate shift to encourage patrons to linger and spend. While the ever-present stew remains a staple for the budget-conscious, the centerpiece now is often a roasted joint of meat, a haunch of mutton, a side of pork, or perhaps a goose if the hunt was good brought forth from the kitchen on a great wooden platter to be carved at the table. This is accompanied by loaves of the better, finer textured bread, bowls of dried pea or bean pottage, and perhaps even a wheel of that good, hard cheese the innkeeper had been saving. For those with coin to spare, a shared dish of fermenty wheat berries boiled in milk with eggs and spices might be offered, a rich and luxurious treat. The goal is no longer just to fill a belly quickly, but to provide an experience worth the extended stay and the extra pennies. This shift in menu is perfectly matched by a profound change in the atmosphere. The frantic energy of the noon hour gives way to a low, warm hum of conversation and shared laughter. Patrons are no longer eating alone or in hurried silence. They are pushing tables together, sharing trenchers, and calling for another round of drinks. The evening is when the inn truly earns its name as a public house, a vital social center for the entire community. Local craftsmen and farmers, their day's labor done, gather to debate the price of wool, complain about the weather's effect on the crops, or simply enjoy the rare luxury of not being at home. Travelers, emboldened by the festive mood and a few cups of ale, begin to share tales of the road, their stories growing taller and more incredible with each passing hour. The innkeeper circulates through this convivial throng, his manner changed. He is less a frantic conductor and more a gracious host, joining in snippets of conversation, laughing at a familiar joke, and gently encouraging the flow of food and, most importantly, drink. For the evening's true economic engine is alcohol. While ale was the lifeblood of the midday meal, the night belongs to wine, stronger ale, and even the occasional imported spirit for the very wealthy. The sales strategy shifts from mere hydration to deliberate indulgence. Servers are instructed to keep a watchful eye on every half-empty tankard, offering a prompt refill before the patron even has to ask. The innkeeper might personally recommend a particular wine he's just tapped, boasting of its provenance from Gascony or the Rhine Valley. He knows that as inhibitions lower and camaraderie builds, the willingness to spend increases exponentially. A group of merchants sealing a deal will order a bottle of the best wine without a second thought. A table of locals, deep in their cups and their conversation, might lose track of how many rounds they've actually consumed. The evening's profits are built on this relaxed, social drinking, making the alcohol sales not just a stream of income, but a tidal wave that washes over the day's earlier earnings. To fuel this atmosphere and keep patrons planted in their seats, entertainment often becomes a key ingredient. If the inn is fortunate, a traveling minstrel might arrive with the evening crowd, his lute slung across his back, seeking a meal and a few coins in exchange for his songs. His arrival is a boon for business. The innkeeper quickly negotiates a deal, a hot meal and a place to sleep in the stable loft in return for an evening's performance. As the minstrel takes up a position near the hearth and begins to play, the entire dynamic of the room shifts. The chatter dies down to a respectful murmur as his voice rises in a well-known ballad of chivalry or a bawdy-drinking song. Soon, the entire room is joining in on the chorus, pounding their tankards on the tables in time with the music. The music acts as a powerful social glue, bonding strangers and friends alike in a shared experience. It also dramatically slows the turnover of tables. No one is in a hurry to leave while the music plays. They order another drink, then another, captivated by the story and the melody. A good minstrel doesn't just provide background noise. He is a master of pacing, knowing just when to launch into an upbeat tune to revive the crowd's energy or a slow, sad saga to make them reflective and thirsty. His presence transforms the inn from a mere service provider into a destination, a place of memory and song where the troubles of the outside world are held at bay by the firelight and the music. As the evening's merriment begins to wind down and the first yawns appear among the locals, a different kind of guest approaches the bar, the overnight traveler, bleary-eyed from the road and clutching a travel warrant or a letter of introduction. The innkeeper's role now shifts from jovial host to a figure of solemn responsibility, the chamberlain. This is a critical transaction, far more complex than simply renting a bed for the night. His first task is the assessment of character. His eyes, sharpened by years of judging men, quickly scan the new arrival. Is this a respectable merchant with a well-stamped pass, a pilgrim with a bona fide scallop shell sewn to his tunic, or a shifty-eyed individual with a story that doesn't quite align with the mud on his boots? The decision to offer a room is a weighty one, for the innkeeper is legally and financially responsible for the safety and conduct of everyone under his roof once they are admitted. The negotiation of terms is brisk and direct, conducted in hushed tones at the end of the bar to maintain the guest's privacy. The price is agreed upon, often with a small deposit paid upfront. Then comes the moment of revelation. The innkeeper retrieves a heavy iron key, or more commonly, just a tallow candle to light the way, and leads the guest up the narrow, creaking staircase. The reality of medieval accommodation is a far cry from our modern expectations of privacy. He pushes open a heavy wooden door to reveal not a private suite, but a communal chamber. The room is typically dominated by a single large, wooden-framed bed, a rope-strung platform heaped with straw-stuffed mattresses, and coarse woolen blankets, designed to be shared by multiple strangers. In smaller inns, the entire loft might be a single room with pallets scattered across the floor. The innkeeper's pitch is one of practicality, not luxury. He demonstrates the bed's sturdiness with a firm push, points out the shared chamber pot in the corner, and assures the guest that the straw was recently changed. For an extra farthing, he might provide an additional blanket, a small luxury against the night's chill. The most delicate part of the entire ritual involves the guest's valuables. A traveling merchant might be carrying a considerable purse of silver, A pilgrim's might have a precious relic, and even a humble scribe would fear the loss of his precious inks and parchments. The innkeeper offers a crucial service, safeguarding. He presents a locked, iron-banded strongbox kept behind the bar or in his own private quarters. With great ceremony, he opens it with a key from the heavy ring at his belt, allowing the guest to place their money belt, jewelry, or important documents inside before locking it again. This act is a powerful contract of trust. The innkeeper is staking his reputation on the security of that box. Its loss would mean ruin, not just from the financial compensation, but from the irreversible damage to his name. For those who cannot afford this service or who are overly paranoid, the innkeeper might instead suggest a less secure but still common practice: sleeping with one's purse literally tied to one's wrist, or using the bundled travel cloak as a lumpy pillow. Once the terms are settled and the valuables secured, the guest is left to negotiate the final challenge, the social contract of the shared space. They must now climb into a bed still warm from a previous occupant or lie down on a pallet next to a snoring stranger, placing their fate in the hands of the innkeeper's judgment and the thin veil of communal trust. The creak of the floorboards, the rustle of straw, and the unfamiliar breathing patterns of roommates become the unsettling lullaby of the medieval traveler, all under the watchful, albeit distant, eye of the innkeeper who now descends the stairs, his responsibility for these souls firmly established until the dawn. The raucous energy of the evening finally begins to ebb, signaled by the village watchman's distant call marking the late hour. The minstrel has packed away his lute, the last of the shared platters have been cleared, and now only a handful of the most determined locals remain, huddled over their nearly empty cups, their conversation having slowed to a low, drowsy murmur. This is the innkeeper's final negotiation of the day, a delicate dance between host and friend. He cannot simply shout for them to leave. These are his neighbors, his most reliable customers. Instead, he begins the subtle ritual of closing. He moves to the main door and draws the heavy bolt across it with a loud, definitive thud, a sound that speaks louder than any words. He might start collecting the empty tankards from the surrounding tables, the clatter of wood on wood a persistent hint. Then comes the most powerful signal of all. He begins to douse the wall torches, one by one, plunging corners of the room into shadow. The pool of light and warmth shrinks, concentrating around the lingering group. He approaches them not with impatience, but with a tone of genuine, weary camaraderie. One last round for the road, my friends, on the house, he might offer, serving a final measure of ale. This gesture of generosity acknowledges their loyalty while framing their departure not as an expulsion, but as the natural, mutual conclusion to a long day. It is a masterstroke of community management, ensuring they will return tomorrow with no ill will, only the memory of a final free drink. Once the last patron has stumbled out in the night, offering a slurred blessing and a promise to return, the great oak door is bolted shut, and a profound, weary silence descends. The innkeeper stands alone in the cavernous, darkening room, surrounded by the disarray of the day's labors. But his work is not yet done. From beneath the bar, he retrieves the strongbox, its weight a tangible measure of the day's success. The final accounting is a quiet, solitary ritual. He empties the leather pouch that hung from his belt all day, a jangling cascade of silver pennies, halfpennies, and the occasional foreign coin spilling onto the worn wood of the counting table. Under the guttering light of a single candle, he separates and stacks the currency with practiced efficiency, his fingers automatically sorting by metal and mint. He weighs any suspicious coins on his small scale, his mind already calculating the losses from clippings and counterfeits. The notched tally sticks representing local credit are gathered and set aside for tomorrow's ledger entry. This daily reckoning is the ultimate report card. The weight of the coin stacks, the fullness of the strongbox. These are the raw numbers that determine if he can afford to fix the leaking roof, purchase that extra barrel of good wine, or simply keep his family fed through the lean winter months. It is a moment of stark, unvarnished truth, separated from the cheerful noise and social performance of the hours before. With the coins securely locked away, only one task remains, and it is the most symbolic of the entire day. He stands before the great hearth, the heart of his inn that he had nurtured from a single spark in the pitch-black morning. The fire that has cooked every meal, warmed every guest, and lit the room for hours of fellowship is now banked for the night. He does not douse it with water. That would send a cloud of choking ash through the room and make the morning's rebirth of the flame infinitely harder. Instead, he uses a long-handled poker to carefully push the largest logs and embers together into a concentrated, glowing mound. He then covers this core with a thick layer of ash from the edges of the hearth, insulating the fierce heat within. A skilled innkeeper knows exactly how to manage this process so that deep within that ashen mound, a bed of hot coals will smolder through the night, preserving the precious spark. In the morning, it will take but a few moments of careful blowing and the addition of fresh kindling to coax the dormant fire back into a roaring blaze, connecting the labor of one day directly to the beginning of the next. As the last light of the embers vanishes beneath the gray ash, the room is plunged into a darkness broken only by his single candle. The cycle is complete. The sanctuary is sealed, its keeper alone with his earnings and exhaustion, the silence a stark contrast to the cacophony he has orchestrated since before the sun rose. Yet even with the doors barred and the strongbox locked away, the innkeeper's duty was not done. A profound vulnerability settled over the silent inn, a stark reminder that the wealth gathered through the day's labor made him a target for the desperate and the wicked lurking in the night. The final, most critical ritual of the day was the lock-up, a meticulous securing of the fortress that was his home and livelihood. He moved through the darkened common room, the single candle in his hand casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to hide threats in every corner. The heavy bar across the main door, which he had tested hours before at dawn, was now lifted from its brackets and slammed into place with a heavy, definitive thud that echoed through the empty hall. This was more than just a lock. It was a statement. It signaled to the world outside that the inn was closed, sealed off, and under the protection of its keeper. But one door was not enough. Every possible entry point required his attention. He checked the smaller rear door leading to the kitchen yard, ensuring its own sturdy bar was firmly seated. Each window shutter, already closed against the evening chill, received a second, more forceful check, his hands testing the iron latches and wooden braces for any sign of weakness. A loose shutter could be pried open from the outside with a quiet knife blade, offering a silent entrance for a thief. His ears strained against the silence, listening for any sound out of place. A furtive footstep on the cobbles outside, the scrape of metal on wood, the nervous whicker of a horse in the stable that sensed an unfamiliar presence. This hyper-vigilance was exhausting but essential. A single moment of carelessness could lead to ruin. The stables demanded a final visit, despite the cold and the dark. Stepping out into the brisk night air, he would make a slow circuit of the yard, his eyes scanning the deep shadows between the carts and storage sheds. He checked the stable door itself, ensuring the simple but effective lock, often just a wooden hasp and a forged iron pin, was secure. Peering into the dark, warm interior, he listened to the familiar sounds of the animals, the steady crunching of hay, the soft snorts, the rustle of straw as they settled. These sounds were a comfort. They meant all was well. A panicked whinny or an unnatural silence would have sent him rushing for help. The inn's own draft horse and any valuable animals left in his care represented a significant part of his stored wealth, and their safety was paramount. Only after this complete circuit of his domain was he willing to contemplate sleep. But even rest was a conditional thing, fraught with responsibility. The innkeeper and his family did not enjoy the luxury of retiring to a remote, private chamber. Their sleeping quarters were often a small room directly off the common room, or even a curtained alcove behind the bar. This was a strategic choice, not one of comfort. They slept lightly, their ears attuned to the symphony of the night sounds of the inn. The creak of a floorboard under an unfamiliar weight, the splintering crack of wood from a forced door, the sudden alarmed cry of a goose or chicken in the yard. Any of these would bring them instantly awake and reaching for the cudgel or knife kept close at hand. The innkeeper's rest was a watchful vigil, a light doze punctuated by the need to interpret every noise. He slept not as a man off duty, but as a sentinel finally sitting down, still clad in half his armor, knowing the night held dangers that respected no hour. This constant, low hum of anxiety was the price of his prosperity, the unshakable undercurrent of danger that flowed just beneath the surface of his seemingly welcoming and cheerful world. But the relentless public performance of the innkeeper was only half the story, a reality made possible by an entire world of private, unseen labor conducted by his family. In a true family-run establishment, the lines between household and business didn't just blur. They vanished completely. The innkeeper's wife was far more than a spouse. She was a co-manager, a head of operations whose domain extended from the deepest larder to the highest guest chamber. Her day began alongside her husband's, but while he battled the main hearth, her first duty was often to the smaller, more precise baking oven. The dough, mixed and left to rise overnight, was now ready. She would shape the loaves, her hands moving with a speed born of countless mornings, and feed them into the intense heat. The quality of the bread was a direct reflection of her skill, and a poorly baked, dense loaf could draw grumbles from even the most forgiving patron. Beyond the baking, her command of the kitchen was absolute. She was the master of preservation, knowing precisely how to salt a side of bacon, smoke a joint of beef over a specific wood to achieve the right flavor, or pack vegetables in sand in the root cellar to last through the winter. She managed the delicate ecosystem of the dairy, skimming cream for butter, and ensuring the cheeses were turned and cared for. When a supplier arrived, her opinion on the quality of the flour or the freshness of the eggs was often the final word. She was also the inn's primary medic, her knowledge of herbs indispensable. A traveler suffering from an ague would be given a tea of steeping chamomile and mint from her garden. A cook who burned a hand would have the wound treated with a poultice of honey and plantain. Her role was a continuous cycle of creation, preservation, and healing, all conducted away from the admiring glances of the customers in the common room. The children, too, were woven into the fabric of the business from the moment they could walk. There was no concept of a separate childhood. Their play was often a mimicry of the work happening around them, which quickly evolved into actual responsibility. A child of 5 might be tasked with collecting eggs from the henhouse or fetching a specific herb from the garden patch. By 7 or 8, they were likely the designated turnspit, their small arm aching from the endless, monotonous rotation of the roasting joint, a job too crucial to trust to a distracted servant. Older children graduated to serving ale, clearing tables, and minding the younger siblings, all while navigating the complex social landscape of a building filled with strangers. They learned to read people's moods, to be cheerful and helpful without being intrusive, and to spot potential trouble and immediately report it to their father. Their education was the inn itself, a daily lesson in arithmetic from counting tankards, in geography from listening to travelers, and in human nature from observing the full spectrum of society that passed through their home. Their entire world was this bustling, demanding microcosm, and their labor, though often unpaid and unrecognized, was the essential grease that kept the entire machine running smoothly. The family ate their meals in the kitchen between rushes, stole moments of conversation in the bustling yard, and fell into bed exhausted, only to begin again a few hours later. Their home was never truly their own. It was a public stage, and they were both the performers and the stagehands, their private lives an open secret that sustained the very heart of the enterprise. And just as the innkeeper mastered the rhythm of a single day, his entire existence was governed by the relentless turn of the seasons, a cycle that could bring either crippling scarcity or overwhelming, manic abundance. The weather was not a minor inconvenience. It was the ultimate master of his fate. Winter transformed the world outside into a silent, frozen prison. Snowdrifts buried the roads, isolating the town and strangling the vital flow of travelers. Each morning, the innkeeper would peer out through the frosted glass, his heart sinking at the sight of an unbroken blanket of white. The common room, once bustling, would sit eerily quiet for days on end, occupied only by a handful of locals huddled close to the hearth, nursing a single tankard for hours to save coin. This seasonal stagnation was a financial nightmare. The steady river of coin from travelers dried up completely, yet the fixed costs remained. The fire in the great hearth had to be fed constantly, devouring the precious store of firewood that had taken all autumn to stack. The few animals in the stables still required fodder, a dwindling resource he'd have to barter for at a premium. His own family and any live-in servants still had to be fed from the carefully hoarded winter stores of grain, smoked meat, and root vegetables. Every salted fish pulled from the barrel, every handful of barley tossed in the thinning pottage, was a subtraction from his capital. The winter innkeeper became a master of scarcity, stretching every resource, inventing meals from near nothing, and praying the cold would break before his supplies did. It was a tense, anxious hibernation, a battle fought not for profit, but for simple survival until the spring thaw. Yet this dead calm could be shattered in an instant by the very forces that promised prosperity. The announcement of a major pilgrimage route passing nearby or a royal charter granting a week-long fair to the town sent a surge of both anticipation and dread through the innkeeper. This was the opportunity he'd been waiting for, a chance to earn a year's profits in a single frantic week. But it was also a logistical ordeal that tested his limits. Weeks in advance, the preparations began. He would dispatch orders for supplies on a scale he'd never normally contemplate, taking on debt to secure extra barrels of ale, entire sides of beef, and wagon loads of grain, all while praying his estimations were correct. Over-ordering could bankrupt him if the crowd failed to materialize. Under-ordering meant turning away a fortune at his doorstep. When the event arrived, the quiet inn erupted into a barely controlled riot. The common room was packed from dawn until long past midnight, a heaving mass of humanity where every square inch of floor space was valuable real estate. Travelers, unable to find a bed, would offer to sleep sitting up on a bench, or even on the floor beneath a table for a reduced rate. The stable yard became a gridlock of carts, wagons, and panicked animals, his ostlers working until they dropped from exhaustion. The demand for food and drink was insatiable. The kitchen operated in a perpetual state of emergency. The great cauldrons of stew emptied as fast as they were filled. The innkeeper himself became a whirlwind of coordination, his voice growing hoarse from shouting orders over the din, his mind a blur of calculations as he tried to keep pace with the flood of unfamiliar coin and credit. He had to be more vigilant than ever, for such crowds also attracted pickpockets, con artists, and cut-purses looking to exploit the chaos. Fistfights broke out over disputed seats or perceived insults, and the risk of a fire from a knocked-over candle in the overcrowded room was a constant, terrifying specter. He slept in fitful minutes, if at all, surviving on adrenaline and the palpable energy of the coin piling up in his strongbox. For one glorious, exhausting week, his inn was the center of the universe, and he was its frantic, harried god. And then, as quickly as it began, it was over. The fair ended, the pilgrims moved on, and an almost deafening silence would fall once more. The innkeeper would stand amidst the wreckage, the stained floors, the depleted larders, the utter exhaustion of his family and staff, and finally count the take. This single week of beautiful, brutal chaos would determine whether the coming winter was a time of anxious want or secure, comfortable rest, the ultimate reward for a year of relentless toil. Even with a well-stocked larder and a bustling common room, the specter of sudden, total ruin was the innkeeper's constant, unwelcome companion. For all his skill and vigilance, he operated on a precipice, and a single stroke of bad luck, often completely beyond his control, could erase a lifetime of work in a matter of days. The most feared of these catastrophes was disease. The arrival of a traveler carrying a pestilence like the plague was a death sentence for the business, even if the innkeeper himself survived. The first sign might be a guest complaining of chills and a fever over his morning ale. Within hours, the telltale buboes would appear, and panic would spread faster than the sickness itself. The local bailiff or town council, upon hearing the news, would act with ruthless efficiency. The entire inn would be sealed shut, a great cross painted on the door to warn all away. The innkeeper, his family, his staff, and every guest inside were now prisoners in a plague house, left to either recover or perish together. Even if they all miraculously survived, the stigma would linger for years. No one would willingly drink from a tankard or sleep in a bed where the Black Death had festered. The building itself might be burned to the ground by a terrified mob, a final, fiery end to a thriving enterprise. But one didn't need a pandemic to face disaster. The daily reliance on preservation made food and drink a constant source of danger. A misjudgment in the larder, a barrel of ale tapped a week too late, or a joint of meat that had begun to turn could have devastating consequences. If a batch of ale soured or became infected with vinegar-producing bacteria, the entire barrel was a total loss, a direct hit to his finances. Worse yet was serving it. A patron complaining that the ale tasted off was a bad review that could travel for miles. But serving contaminated food was a criminal matter. An outbreak of food poisoning, whether from spoiled meat, toxic fungus on grain, or a poorly prepared dish, could sicken dozens. In an age without understanding of germs, the blame fell squarely on the innkeeper. He could be dragged before the local court, fined into oblivion, and his license to operate revoked. His name would be synonymous with poison, making a return to the trade impossible. His meticulous morning inspection of the larder was therefore a defense against both financial loss and potential manslaughter charges, a daily high-wire act performed with his reputation and freedom hanging in the balance. Above all other fears, however, loomed the threat of fire. The medieval inn was a perfect tinderbox. Its structure was built of dry, aged timber, its roof was thatched straw, its floors were strewn with loose reeds, and its heart was a constantly blazing open hearth. A single spark jumping onto the wrong surface, a carelessly placed candle knocked over by a drunken patron, or a kitchen ember not fully banked for the night could spell doom. Once a fire took hold in the thatch, there was little anyone could do. The bucket chains formed by panicked neighbors were a futile gesture against such an inferno. The innkeeper could only stand and watch as everything he had built, the building, the stores, the strong box of coins, the very tools of his trade, was consumed in a roaring, terrifying blaze. Insurance was non-existent. Such a loss was absolute and irrevocable. He was not just out of a job, he was left destitute. His entire investment and his family's means of survival turned to ash and smoke in a matter of minutes. This ultimate nightmare informed every one of his nightly rituals, from the careful banking of the hearth to the obsessive checking of latches and candles. He knew that his world, for all its noise and solid oak beams, was fragile, and that his daily hustle was a race to build a future faster than fate could burn it down. So let us now step back and witness this single day in its entirety, not as a collection of tasks, but as a seamless, 24-hour marathon of endurance. From the moment our innkeeper stirred in the pre-dawn blackness to the final, where he listened for trouble in the dead of night, his existence was a masterclass in relentless multitasking. His body was in constant motion, hauling water, heaving barrels, scrubbing floors, and turning spits. His mind, however, was engaged in an even more exhausting race, calculating inventory, negotiating prices, assessing character, and outthinking disaster at every turn. There was no lunch break, no quiet office, no moment where the weight of responsibility lifted. The romantic image of the jovial, apron-clad host passing out tankards is not wrong, but it is tragically incomplete. That smiling public face was the brilliant final performance in a day-long drama of grueling backstage labor. The physical toll alone would break most modern individuals. Consider the sheer weight moved in a single day. Hundreds of pounds of water carried bucket by bucket from the well. Sides of meat and full ale casks manhandled into place. The endless hauling of soiled rushes and heavy chamber pots. This was performed not in climate-controlled comfort, but in the choking dust of the yard, the oppressive heat of the kitchen, and the biting cold of the Pridon cellar. His hands were not soft. They were calloused and stained, skilled with tools not for a hobby, but for survival. The hammer for repairs, the awl for leather, the knife for butchery, the scales for coin. Every muscle ached with a deep, familiar fatigue that sleep would only partially relieve before the cycle began again. Yet the mental and emotional strain was arguably greater. He was the ultimate people manager, overseeing a tiny, often unskilled workforce he had to motivate and direct without the luxury of formal training or HR departments. He was the chief financial officer, acting as accountant, fraud detector, and risk assessor, his mind a living ledger of debits and credits, his entire fortune vulnerable to a single bad batch of ale or a clenched fistful of clipped coin. He was the head of security, the psychologist, and the diplomat, constantly reading the room for trouble, de-escalating conflicts with a mix of charm and implied force. and making split-second judgments on whom to trust with a room or a line of credit. This constant low hum of vigilance, the need to be always watching, always listening, always calculating, is a form of stress that is utterly draining, a weight that settles on the soul as much as the spine. And underpinning it all was the profound isolation of his role. For all the noise and the crowds, the innkeeper stood ultimately alone. The buck stopped with him. A brawl, a case of food poisoning, a failed brew, a theft. The responsibility and the financial repercussions landed squarely on his shoulders. His was the face patrons would blame, the name the magistrate would call, the hand that had to absorb the loss. His family worked alongside him, but the final decisions, the strategic gambles, the terrifying weight of potential ruin were his to bear. The cheerful host the customers saw was a persona, a necessary performance crafted to put them at ease, to encourage spending, and to project an aura of control that he had to project even when he felt anything but in control. This, then, was the reality, not a quaint historical caricature, but a figure of immense resilience and multifaceted skill. The medieval innkeeper was a study in contradictions, a public figure with an intensely private burden, a businessman trading in both coin and community, a rugged laborer who wielded psychological insight as deftly as a brewer's mallet. His inn was not merely a building. It was a fragile ecosystem of commerce, safety, and social exchange that he single-handedly nurtured and defended against a world of threats. To reduce his day to serving ale is to miss the entire point. He was the architect of his own destiny, building a life one carefully negotiated deal, one hauled bucket of water, and one well-banked fire at a time. His success measured each night in the weight of a strongbox and the profound, hard-won silence of a sanctuary secured against the dangers of the dark. And so, as our long day finally draws to a close, we're left with a profound appreciation for the sheer magnitude of the innkeeper's world. This was not a simple life of pouring drinks and sweeping floors. It was a relentless, multifaceted performance that demanded the strength of a laborer, the sharp mind of a commodities trader, the diplomacy of a statesman, and the unwavering vigilance of a sentry. We've walked through the echoing silence of the pre-dawn audit, felt the frantic pressure of the midday rush, and shared in the weary satisfaction of the final lock-up, all to understand that an inn was so much more than a building. It was a living, breathing organism, and the innkeeper was its heart, its brain, and its steadfast guardian. The true legacy of these men and women lies in the three pillars that supported their existence. First was the unending physical toil, the raw endurance required to master a dozen trades before breakfast, from brewer to blacksmith, from chambermaid to chef. Second was the brilliant, often ruthless business acumen needed to navigate a perilous economy of fluctuating supplies, foreign currencies, and cutthroat competition, where a single bad deal or a soured cask could spell financial ruin. And finally, perhaps most importantly, was their irreplaceable role as the central nervous system of their community. They were the information brokers, the peacekeepers, the bankers, and the welcoming committee for an entire region, weaving together the isolated threads of medieval life into a vibrant social fabric. These forgotten routines, these daily acts of humble heroism, were the absolute backbone of the medieval world. Without the sanctuary of the inn, trade routes would have seized up, pilgrims would have faltered on their journeys, and news would have traveled at a crawl, isolating villages and stifling progress. The flow of goods, ideas, and people that defined an era depended entirely on these way stations and the extraordinary individuals who ran them. They were the unsung engineers of history, their calloused hands and shrewd minds quietly building the infrastructure of connection that allowed kingdoms to function and cultures to intertwine. We've journeyed together through one demanding day, but your journey into history is just beginning. I'm deeply curious to know what part of this hidden world resonated most with you. Was it the incredible complexity of their financial systems, acting as bankers and fraud detectors, the sheer physical hardship of their sanitation rituals, or perhaps the immense social pressure of managing a crowded common room? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know which aspect of the innkeeper's daily grind surprised you the most. If you enjoyed stepping back in time to uncover these lost stories, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more journeys into the heart of history, where we rediscover the people, the places, and the everyday marvels that built our world.